Very good afternoon, namaskar. Let me greet all of you. We just had today Ram Navami, Durga Puja. So it's an auspicious day. We are starting to discuss climate change. And climate change is something which we are doing everything against what the God has created. So we need to really be worried about climate change in that sense, and we discuss it in the right earnest to reach as much close to what the God has created and asked us to live by. I would like to make a presentation. Some of the points which Mr. Kapoor has covered may be repeated, but I think I'm going to give you a little bit more statistics as far as the climate change is concerned. It always refers to the long-term shifts in temperatures and weather conditions. You all of us know, I don't have to explain that, and since 1800s, human activities have been responsible for this. And there are all the factors which are identified as impacting the climate, but ultimately all they go down to the creation of greenhouse gases, and whether it is due to the fossil fuels or due to the industrial activity or even the living style of humans and so on. Second thing is the human civilization is experiencing a non-linear growth, and particularly with respect to the energy demand, and with the way the technology is going, this demand is increasing on a everyday basis. So I would like to discuss with you some of the figures which are in comparison to what is happening world over and how India is faring with respect to that. If all of you look at this slide, you will see that global per capita energy consumption is 20,902 kilowatt hours as per 2021 data, whereas India's global per capita greenhouse gas emissions, I'll come to that. We are also hosting G20 nations now, G20 activities. So some figures of G20 I'd like to give: 85% of the global GDP, 75% of the global trade, 65% of the world's population, and 75% of the world greenhouse gas emissions as per 2020 data. Now, global per capita emissions are 6.3 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, 2020 data. Indian scenario is we have 6,992 kilowatt hour per person. Our 2.4 tons CO2 equivalent, which is less than 40% of the world average of the greenhouse gas emissions, and contribution to the cumulative carbon emissions between 1815 and 2021 is less than 4%. That is our record. These figures indicate the colors, various colors indicate what is the kind of per capita primary energy consumption in 2021. Now, global net CO2 emissions, which are responsible for generally the global warming. So look at the world figure. On the x-axis, you have the numbers of years, 1992, and y-axis, you have the billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions. If you see by different usage, electricity and heat gives you about 15.7 billion tons of CO2, transport about 8.22, manufacturing and construction about 6.25, buildings about 2.79, and so on. And this has been happening from 1999 to 2019, and it is on the rising path. The per capita CO2 emissions by sector in the world, the two bar figures indicate the per capita CO2 and the percentage increases with respect to each sector. So the electricity and heat is about 2.04, transport is 1.07, and so on. Percentage-wise, it is electricity and heat takes about 41.8 in terms of the percentage of the per capita CO2 emissions. So this is how we are faring as far as the net CO2 emissions are concerned. According to the International Energy Agency, to reach net zero, over 10 billion tons of CO2 will need to be captured per year by 2070. That is the kind of a number we have. And in that, if you see, we'll have to take care of 74.4% is CO2, then methane, and then rest of the other gases. The primary consumption by source, if you would like to look at, this percentage is again in terms of both coal, oil, gas, hydropower, solar, wind, and biofuel indicated here. The fact is that fossil fuel is taking about 82.9%, and renewable energy is going to about 17.1%. That is the global scenario. As far as the Indian scenario is concerned, our coal takes about 57.1%, and energy consumption-wise, we are today going fairly low at the moment. But fossil fuel is about 90.2%, and the renewable and nuclear is about 9.8%. That is in terms of the ratios what we have today. Now, we did some kind of analysis in NITI Aayog, and we have seen that what kind of pathways we have to follow if we have to control this, and what will be the likely emergence. So, if you take from 1990 to 2100, the pathway to net zero goals is business as usual, trends of post-industrial revolution project, greenhouse gas emissions to rise 150 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2100, which will amount to rise in temperature. That means no climate policies were taken into account to reach about 4.1 to 4.8 degrees Celsius, which will be disastrous. Under current climate policies, what we have, 2050, which is the other figure, that is the brick red color, you can see, which is greenhouse gas emissions will peak to about 50 gigatons, limiting the global temperature to about 2.5 to 2.9. If we implement what we have promised in terms of 2 degrees Celsius and 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway, then you will notice that greenhouse gas emissions will peak by 2025 and come down to about 2070 to the 2 degree pathway or 1.5 degree pathway. These are the basis on which India is trying to now fix the energy transition strategy, what Mr. Kapoor was talking about. So what is the way to abate the carbon and bring it out under the 1.5 degree scenario? The abatement is through renewables, energy conservation and efficiency, electrification and its end-use sectors, hydrogen and its derivative, along with CCS and CCU industry, and of course the BECCS and other carbon removal measures. Each one has a contribution. For example, renewable, if you take 25%, energy conservation and efficiency can be attributing about 25%, electrification 20%. So all put together, you can save almost about 36.9 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year, which is very close to today's global emissions of 42.2 or something like that gigatons per year. That is the kind of number we have today. So if we take measures in terms of this 25%, so on, we can have a situation that we can keep this thing under control. Now, what does India have? India has some of the major areas which are responsible for these emissions. India's power sector is the largest contributor to the CO2 emissions, which is about 1,147 million tons of CO2. Next is industry, 762, next is transport, 337, then buildings and so on. The change in CO2 emissions and GDP per capita are also shown in this other graph. GDP is rising, we are going for, higher and higher. The production-based CO2 emissions and consumption-based CO2 emissions are also rising in triple sense. The percentage increase are going to 300%, and GDP, of course, we are going quite high. Another scenario simulation we have done, and which gives you some impression how we should be working on. If you take 2020 and compare it what we need at 1.5 degrees Celsius, we are up by about 86%. We are at 2.9. As far as the carbon dioxide, gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent is concerned. If you take the business as usual, as we call it, that means you are reducing at the rate of 1.3% per annum, as we did in the case of 2010 and 19, then we will reach a figure of 11.8 gigatons. If we take what we call as the line of sight scenario. What is line of sight scenario? Implementing of India's NDC existing and currently announced policies, technology advancement as per current trajectory, and shift in demand to sustainable alternatives like EVs and so on. If we follow that, then we are peaking in 2025-26 about 3.8 by about 2037, and then coming down to about roughly 1 by about 2070. There's an accelerated scenario also which has been simulated, which all says that we will peak by about 3.4, we will reach by 2027, and adoption, it will require adoption of new policies such as carbon pricing, technology breakthroughs in CCUS and faster implementation of existing levers, and accelerated shift to sustainable consumption like EV, alternative minerals, coarse cereals, and green steel. Now, all along with this, we have to also look at the sustainability development goals. So problem is ensure sustainable energy for humanity, nurturing the quality of life from all aspects, which requires 3 pillars, particularly energy access, energy efficiency, and clean and affordable energy. All the 3 measures have to be kept in mind. So future energy demand is one of the major parameters which will dictate what is our energy transition strategy. The country's energy demand has tripled over the last 3 decades and is marked by a falling share of traditional biomass, leaving coal and oil in a dominant position. Electricity demand under the business as usual scenario in 2047 will be about 5,651 terawatt hours. This is our simulated figure. Total energy demand by 2070 will be about 18,900 to 22,300 terawatt hours. Coal to play a dominant role and share in primary energy would rise to 50% in 2047. Not a very good statement to the ears. Conventional ways of utilization of fossil fuel will see complete paradigm shift, aiming towards increased efficiency and cleaner approaches. India's stance on sustainable energy and climate change is, we secured 8th position in the Climate Change Performance Index, 2023, which is 2 positions up from the last edition. India's NDC targets and accelerated renewable energy pathways can double the human resource involvement by 2030 and up to 3.6 million by 2050. Adoption of the decarbonization strategies can lead to projected financial relief of about 12 trillion in the health sector. To further realize a healthy and sustainable lifestyle, Honorable Prime Minister has already launched what is called Lifestyle for Environment, which has been added to India's NDC as a key to combating climate change and emphasizes on environmental lifestyle, energy conservation, and sustainability. Mr. Kapoor touched some of these figures, which was one of the proclamation we made in the Glasgow COP26. To counter the climate change, we have what is called Panchamrit. India will reach its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030. India will meet 50% of its energy requirements by renewable by 2030. India will reduce the total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now onwards till 2030. By 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by less than 45%. By the year 2070, India will achieve the net carbon zero. Now, what steps have been taken? Steps for 500 gigawatts non-fossil energy by 2030. Revised guidelines for thermal power generation companies to set up renewable energy generation capacity, either by themselves or through developers by open bids and supplying it to the consumer under the existing PPAs. The gains from the bundling of renewable energy with thermal will be shared between the generation and the distribution companies. As the renewable energy will be balanced with the thermal energy, the DISCOMs will not need to acquire separate capacity for balancing of the renewable energy. Progress on preparing a roadmap to achieve 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel-based energy capacity by 2030. 165.9 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity projects have been installed in the country as on 2022. Projects of 72.61 gigawatt capacity are under various stages of implementation. Projects of 21.11 gigawatt capacity are under various stages of bidding. Steps for 50% energy requirement from renewable, what we are taking. India achieved its nationally determined contribution, NDC, commitment of 40% non-fossil based installed power capacity 9 years ahead of the target. India is set to add 27,000 circuit kilometers of interstate power transmission networks by 2024, as it has already added 6,500 circuit kilometers lines so far. I think Mr. Kapoor talked about one of these aspects. The power transmission network expansion has been planned, keeping in mind the goal of having 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel-based electricity generation capacity in the country. What are the steps for reduction of 1 billion ton of carbon emissions by 2030? Tax concessions and incentives such as production-linked and incentive scheme for promotion of manufacturing and adoption of renewable energy. By 2030, Indian Railways alone will lead to a reduction of emissions by 60 million tons annually. What other measures have been taken? For energy efficiency, perform, achieve, and trade. That PAT scheme launched in 2012 has helped India save about 35,141 million kilowatt hours. The Ujjwala scheme has distributed more than 37.5 crore LED bulbs. The faster adoption and manufacturing of hybrid and electric vehicles has incentivized the sale of more than 1.36 million electric vehicles in India today. The government has set up charging infrastructure for EVs under the FAME scheme with more than 1,500 charging stations already installed. Other measures are sustainable agriculture. The government has allocated INR 400 crores for the implementation of climate-smart agriculture. Under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, more than 64 million farmers are covered against crop loss due to natural calamities. Afforestation, the government has launched the Green India Mission, which aims to increase the forest cover by 5 million hectares. As of 2019, India's forest cover was 24.39% of the total geographic area, an increase from 23.4% in 2015. Other steps are climate finance. India has set up the National Adaptation Fund for Climate Change to finance adaptation and mitigation projects. The Green Climate Fund has approved 14 projects in India and amounting to 1.2 billion in funding. Pollution mitigation, National Clean Air Program is there. National Disaster Management Authority has developed the National Disaster Management Plan for Climate Change. And of course, R&D, the CSIR has developed a range of climate-resilient technologies, including drought-tolerant crops, salt-tolerant rice, and flood forecasting models. Now, what is ultimately the transition strategy? Carbon capture, clean coal technologies, carbon capture utilization and storage, alternate fuel, methanol and ethanol, hydrogen, as Mr. Kapoor was talking. I have a slightly different take on that. Green is the world today, all over the universe, but I'm saying blue to green is the world. Small modular reactors as a nuclear pathway, renewables, of course, sustainable mobility, and water battery, the energy storage as and when it becomes sort of affordable. The clean coal opportunities, because India, through our simulation, we have already seen that we have to live with coal and fossil fuel for some time. So it becomes integral that we should adopt clean coal technologies, which will be like integrated gasification and combined cycle. The two graphs, what you are saying, IGCC is the lower graph, which gives you certain carbon reduction. But if you do IGCC with carbon dioxide capture, you get a very high level of CO2 reduction, and hence you reach the very desired level of the CO2, even with working with coal. India needs to address rising greenhouse gas emissions without compromising economic growth. I think Mr. Kapoor talked about cost, the prices. I think economic growth is very important, and we cannot say that we are in the energy transition mode, so we can compromise. CCUS to play a pivotal role in emission reduction, suited for new and existing fossil fuel, decarbonizing solution for hard-to-abate sectors, direct capture of CO2 from atmosphere, manufacturing methanol and chemicals captured through CO2. What are the renewable energy forecasts? Already we discussed this. I will skip this slide because we have already talked on that. Hydrogen is the enabler. In conjunction with energy efficiency and renewable deployment in power sector, 10% penetration of hydrogen has been announced by the country. But with supply from coal gasification, with CCS and renewable-based electrolysis can help reduce India's 2050 carbon emissions. Demand side, there's a requirement of fuel cells, heat supply power. Supply side, we will have coal gasification with CCS, renewable-based electrolysis. However, Hydrogen production via electrolysis from Indian power grid would yield about 30 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions per kg of hydrogen. Majority of electricity in India being produced by fossil fuels. In comparison, blue hydrogen produced from natural gas reformation is estimated to emit only about 1.7 kg of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. Thus, adopting blue hydrogen will eventually lay the path for green hydrogen with incremental greening of the source electricity. I am an advocate of methanol, an alternate energy source. Why opt methanol fuel? Low emission, used in vehicles worldwide today, improved fuel economy, economical than petrol. Methanol is an environmental friendly fuel. Its derivative DME can replace and can be blended with LPG and diesel. It can replace diesel. Smokeless combustion, efficient and economical, non-carcinogenic and safe to use. How do you use methanol? You can use methanol through blending. You can use 100% methanol. Recently, we have blended methanol with diesel, about 15%, and we are running diesel buses with 35% reduction in emissions. We have also done, one of the problems which Mr. Kapoor was talking about was what to do with the trucks. My answer to that is we should switch over to 100% methanol wherever we are working on the diesel today. There are conversions possible, and we have already launched a M100 truck, which is going to be a game changer as far as the heavy vehicles are concerned. Nuclear is a play to key role in energy transition. You can see up to 95% electricity greenhouse emissions are there, but as you go up, you find that renewable and storage go up and CCS go up. So small modular reactors are the game changer, the key and long-term energy strategy addressing issues for the energy generation mix, the energy demand and their interconnects. The base load requirement can be met by the demand following small modular reactors. Best energy mix strategy for India, especially in the net zero emission scenario, is to use renewable paired with steady carbon-free sources like nuclear energy. So this is the journey we will have, 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050. We have solar panels, green critical mass, wind turbines, critical mass, small modular reactors by 2030, then peaking with oil and coal. Hopefully, the work which has been done on the nuclear fusion may also come through by 2040 or so, then that will also form part of the system. But EV penetration rate, which is about 30 to 40%, will improve, and then EV truck can gain critical mass. So we will have ultimately about 55% renewable power as part of the energy mix, at least by 2050. Priority for India's sustainable growth, build trust and public support for carbon law compatible financial instruments. Go beyond electricity generation. Investment beyond wind, solar, and energy storage needs significant ramping up immediately in sectors such as hydrogen, CCUS, methanol. Revolutionize agriculture subsidies. Demand green public procurement. Demand low carbon infrastructure projects. Reduce risk for venture capital and private equity to drive low energy demand solutions. Incentivize venture capital and private equity towards businesses, driving energy efficiencies, circular economies, and zero carbon emissions. Expand fintech and financial innovation, a 1.53 planet. Support research and development efforts at public and private partnership. Harmonize standards and eliminate unnecessary regulatory barriers.